In this video, I'll be looking at how to answer an exam question on the young generation from an inspector calls. Maybe the exam question you have will actually use the phrase young generation, or maybe it will say something like, how is generational conflict presented in the play? It might say, explore the theme of age, and therefore this video would be useful for any of those questions. Of course, if it's asking for generational conflict or age more generally, then you'll want to also look at my other video on the older generation to be able to fully answer that question. But you may get one that specifically only wants you to focus on the young people. Just a reminder that I tend to focus on the requirements of the Edexcel IGCSE English Literature exam. This is also useful for AQA and other exam boards, but there will be a few slight differences that I'll point out. But if you just want to understand this theme in great detail, you've come to the right place. So I advise that you mostly focus on Sheila and Eric in your answer, as they're characters who were constructed by Priestley specifically to represent the younger generation. It could be useful to acknowledge that Eva and Gerald also belong to this generation, but I think there are aspects about their character that hold them back from making such an impact. And it's up to you. What I'm going to suggest here is that you focus on Sheila and Eric, but I guess my point is that you could also incorporate Eva and Gerald into your argument as well. But some things to note: Eva, because she is from a working class background, she's pretty limited in the impact she can make. She at least attempts to drive change, but her efforts are easily thwarted by Mr. Burling. Gerald, on the other hand, has lots of power because, of course, he's from an upper class background. And he is presented as capable of feeling some remorse, but he gets over it really quickly. And by the end of the play, he's clearly in line with the older generation presented by Mr. and Mrs. Burling. So in a way, I think Priestley wanted to highlight how there was really no hope in the upper class in making meaningful change, as they have every intention of holding on to the economic and social systems in place because, of course, they benefit the most from these systems. So we're left with Eric and Sheila. They are from upper middle class background, so they have power, but there is still hope that they can reject that capitalist ideology that they've been raised on and find a new way to move forward. Just a reminder that J.B. Priestley wrote this play. He is a socialist, and that clearly affects the way he presents the characters on stage, okay? Because his whole aim in writing this play was to undermine capitalism and the social class structure it creates and promote socialism. And if you're doing the Edexcel exam, you do not have to talk about context in great detail. If you're doing AQA, you do, so keep that in mind. But all I'm going to say on this is it's important to think about kind of the mindset of the original audience. The characters on stage are set in 1912. They do not know that the Titanic will sink. They do not know that there will be 2 world wars. The suffragette movement hasn't really succeeded in half as many things as it will by 1945. They do not know there's going to be an economic crisis. And yes, there's a start of workers' strikes, but they don't realise to what extent that will come to by the time we get to 1945. So there's a lot of things that have happened in this time. And so the important thing really to take from this is we're going to see some of these issues raised or challenged by Eric and Sheila, and it makes them look like they have a lot of foresight and that they are 2 characters that should be listened to and taken seriously. Whereas Mr. Burling in particular talks a load of nonsense, right? He has all these predictions for the future that are the complete opposite of what will really happen, and it discredits him. So just keep that in mind in terms of the mindset of the audience. There are 3 things you need to do in your exam. In your analysis, you need to make sure that you incorporate language analysis, form, which is basically looking at stage directions, dialogue, props, those kind of things. And then structure as well. Do you see contrast? Do you see juxtaposition? Do you see a repetition of something? And so those things I will talk through as well. I do advise you have a pen and paper to hand because there's a lot to go through, lots and lots of detail that I'm sure you'll need to pause and take a moment to write down. So my advice is to think about our initial impression of the younger generation at the beginning of the play. Okay, so the opening stage directions, if you look at Eric, he's described as half shy and half assertive. Um, and so I think this represents his internal conflict as well as the contradictory nature of his character that the audience, I think, at the beginning struggle to figure out who he is. And I think part of that is because he doesn't know. He's not quite sure who he is yet. And again, that kind of suggests that he is quite immature at this point as well and not as developed as a person. And so keep that in mind. Okay, he doesn't have much confidence at this stage. That's really important for later. The juvenile language of Sheila, right, referring to her mum as mummy, and the interactions that we see at the beginning with Sheila, she seems quite childish and foolish. And then the back and forth bickering between Eric and Sheila that we see depict them as young children. We'll look at this later, but Priestley carefully, I think, constructs these characters in this way to make their journey even more inspirational. As the play develops, we will see both of them grow in maturity and become independent and critical thinkers. And that surprises the audience and highlights to them that the younger generation should not be underestimated. There's a big message here from Priestley that we should place a lot of hope in the younger generation. They're our only hope that things will really change in the future because they are our future. It's not really a surprise that they are so immature at the beginning of the play when we look at the way that they are patronized by their parents. Okay, so look at the infantilizing language used by Mrs. Burling, right? She calls Sheila dear and child. She refers to Eric as only a boy. So that really reveals that both Sheila and Eric have been denied the opportunity to mature appropriately for their age. It undermines them both and fails to encourage them to seek their own understanding of who they are in the world around them. At the beginning of the play, it was very difficult for Sheila and Eric to contribute to any intelligent discussions, as they are expected to listen to Mr. Burling's endless monologues. His direct question to Sheila, "Are you listening, Sheila?" immediately establishes that it's her role to sit there passively and receive information from her father. Ironically, we know he talks a load of gibberish, right? Everything he says he gets wrong. The incomplete sentence as well of Eric, but still indicates that he's being interrupted by his father when he attempts to add a very valid point to the discussion. Remember, he's asking about war, so it's really quite ironic that he's told, "Let me finish, Eric," because actually this is something that is a real threat. The audience of 1945 know that, and there must be such frustration to watch Mr. Burling basically tell him to shut up. Okay, no, Mr. Burling, listen to your son, he's got a valid point. So, and that imperative, "let me," creates a commanding tone that overpowers Eric and makes it difficult for him to be heard at this point. Really clear power dynamics between the children and the parents at this point. Ultimately, they listen to their parents. They're very obedient children, at least in this the dining room situation. However, when we see Inspector Gould enter the stage, we see a shift in both characters. We realise actually that they are capable of critical thinking. So let's look at Sheila first. Looking at the stage direction, she goes closer to him wonderingly. So she's the first character to sense there is something different about the inspector. The stage direction wonderingly reflects a curiosity and a desire to learn in Sheila that is absent from her parents. These stage directions describe her as moving closer to the inspector, and you could argue that symbolises her being drawn much closer to a socialist mindset and moving further away from a capitalist ideology that's upheld by her parents. And then look at the way she directly criticises her parents. "But these girls aren't cheap labour, they're people." And then to her mother, "I think it was cruel and vile." So the direct criticism of their actions is a sign that she is capable of critical thinking and foreshadows her enlightenment over the course of the play. The juxtaposition of the business language, cheap labour, with people reflects Sheila's attempt to instill a sense of humanity in her parents. The adjectives cruel and vile are a blunt condemnation of her mother, and she speaks also in declarative sentences, and that gives her dialogue a sense of conviction. She's speaking confidently and boldly, basically. Jerick also has a very similar judgmental tone when speaking against his father, really. He could have kept her on instead of throwing her out. Why shouldn't they try for higher wages? We try for the highest possible prices. That also shows he's capable of independent thinking, and foreshadows also the fact that by the end of the play he will not blindly agree with his parents. He's using here logos, or otherwise logic, and that reveals him to be intelligent. Okay, he's an intelligent young man that needs to be given a chance, and that's something Priestley encourages in his audience, right? Is to be a critical thinker, because without being critical, being a critical thinker, then change cannot happen. They are incredibly remorseful. Their actions are horrible towards Eva Smith, but they are the most remorseful out of all the characters. It's not an accident that they are the youngest characters on stage, and they are the ones that feel the most sorry. This really draws a clear divide between the older and younger generation, and that's in the level of responsibility taken by each. So Sheila and Eric take clear responsibility for their actions. Looking at Sheila, it was my own fault. The short declarative sentence represents the willingness of Sheila to accept responsibility for her cruel treatment of Eva Smith. She is the antithesis, the direct opposite of her parents, because they speak at length to deny any responsibility. This gives Sheila credibility and makes her much more likeable to the audience. They have respect for her, that she just puts her hands up and owns what she did. The stage direction involuntarily, my God, Eric's just realised what's happened to Eva Smith and kind of the gravity of it. So that stage direction does indicate an authentic response from Eric. He's capable of compassion. He understands the tragedy of Eva committing suicide. It's intensified using the exclamation, as well as the blasphemous language, God, which would be somewhat frowned upon in 1912. Now, if you look at my my video on Eric, I do question how remorseful he is. I'm not 100% happy with the way he's handled taking responsibility, but I think for the purposes of this essay, I would stay focused on the parts of him that present himself as remorseful. But that's something that you could watch and decide for yourself. Then look at both of them. Very real similarities between Sheila and Eric. Between us, we killed her. That's from Sheila. And Eric, by the end, shouting, we all helped to kill her. So let's look at Sheila first. The use of the first person plural pronoun we emphasizes that Sheila understands and accepts shared responsibility, and the shared responsibility they all had in hurting Eva Smith. She doesn't skirt around it. She uses the verb killed, and that creates a serious tone, and it underscores the grave consequences of their selfish actions and cruel actions. Again, she's the antithesis of her parents' response, as all they do by the end is place the blame on Eric. They're quite happy to point the finger at one of their own. Eric increasingly becomes more animated over the course of the play. Look at him shouting at this point. And that really just highlights again his distress in this moment, and his frustration as well that his parents aren't taking responsibility like he thinks they should. Now, I've included a lot here, but I think this extract is such a great one to zoom in on, to consider how much Sheila and Eric have changed by the end of the play, that I just thought, let's keep it all in. And I've just highlighted where I think would be the opportunities to use specific quotations. But I think it's great to end your essay focusing on the fact that they are dynamic characters. In other words, they change, right? They are very different people to the people we met at the beginning of the play. Okay, so I'm not going to read through the whole extract. Maybe pause this video and read through it yourself, but I'm just going to pinpoint what I think is really important here. So firstly, look at the stage directions. I should mention this is Act 3 as well, towards the end of the play, and the inspector has left. So think about this. This is the boy who started off half shy, half assertive, and allowing his father to speak over him. He's now in control of the room. In this extract, he speaks the most, okay? It should be kept in mind here that Mr. Burling has just told him to sit down, but he does the opposite. He moves above the chair, right? So looking at the stage directions here, highlighted in blue, okay, he moves above the chair, he bursts out, he crosses over to Gerald, he moves to the right of the table. Those movements suggest a sense of freedom and comfort in his own skin, and there's a confidence in him in defying his father. His father wanted him to sit down, and also just directly approaching Gerald too. There's a boldness to that. What a turn of events, that his father rises to interrupt him and fails, suggesting the power dynamics have shifted in this family. The parents no longer have the control and the power over their children. He challenges his parents and Gerald too with a string of questions and declarative sentences which give his dialogue a sense of conviction. He's direct and honest with Gerald. That reveals his maturity. If you recall at the beginning, he's behaving quite suspiciously. We can't quite work out who he is. His parents don't really know who he is. We know eventually he's kind of hidden away from his parents that he's an alcoholic. He's been stealing money. He's been incredibly honest here by the end of the play. And what an important quotation. The money's not the important thing. Here, this is a clear rejection of a capitalist mindset, right? One that puts profit over people, like his father has, and his father has boasted about. He's the antithesis of his father in this moment. He places greater worth on the life of Eva than material wealth. And then look at Eric and Sheila. Look at how they are now, right? What does she say? And Eric's absolutely right. Okay, at the beginning of the play, they demonstrated silly behaviour in their bickerings with one another. Now they are united and their dialogue is serious. Notice also how Sheila refers to Gerald and her parents as they, indicating a clear divide between the younger and older generation. She views them as something other. And that indicates a transition in her values that are independent of her parents and definitely independent of Gerald. So perhaps here Priestley demonstrates the importance for young people to come together to truly make a difference and to just think outside of their family, think outside of what their parents have preached to them, and start standing on their own 2 feet and figuring out who they are and what they believe in. So finally, to shine a light on, I should mention what I think you should do in this essay is end with, and you should be kind of bringing it back to the intentions of the playwright throughout. Your conclusion, please don't just write, in paragraph 1 I said this, in paragraph 2 I said this, here's a summary. Think about the overall intention. What's the overarching point that the playwright Priestley was trying to achieve here? And I think you could summarize that in 3 things. I think he was trying to shine a light on the failings of the older generation and that their traditional classist views through the way we view how successful Eric and Sheila are in taking responsibility and changing. I think, of course, through them, they kind of become a voice for the inspector and therefore a voice for Priestley. Through their dialogue, he promotes more progressive socialist views. And I think he was trying to encourage people to take the younger generation more seriously and to place hope in them, because after all, they are the future. If you have anything to add, I'd love to hear your own ideas. Please pop them in the comment section. And otherwise, if you want any specific advice, you can always reach out to me, Mrs. Rumsey at mrsrumsey.com.